So today we have Joe Cohen from California, from San Francisco. He is an old friend of mine, and he's also a very special, very interesting individual, because he has a very interesting hobbies and very different background from most people. And he's also manufacturing his cables under the brand name Prana Wire. Yes. So. Yeah. Good evening. I mean, it's evening here in California. It's morning. Good morning to you, Joe.
First of all, thank you so much, Slava. It's nice to see you, kind of in the flesh on the flat screen. And, so, yeah, you mentioned a few things about my background. One thing I will say is that my whole life, I've been passionate about music. Music has been a driving force, not always for the better. When you follow your desires, you end up in places you don't expect sometimes. But I have to say, it's been absolutely rewarding overall. As you mentioned, I studied Indian music. I studied with the great master Nikhil Banerjee. I studied with the now deceased and wonderful human being and percussionist Zakir Hussain for 30 plus years. And as you mentioned, I spent 6 years in a Zen center, Zen monastery. And I also became heavily involved in hi-fi, in listening, in lusting after hi-fi equipment, trying my hand to design cables, years ago with my friends. And then meeting a very influential designer for me in my life, a gentleman named Be Yamamura. You may have heard of him. I don't know. He operated in England for a while. He started a company with a cousin of Winston Churchill's, Robert Churchill. And Be was very interesting. He was very much an iconoclast. He built transconductive, current mode amplifiers. He built his own cork-covered single driver, rear-loaded horns.
I've seen the pictures.
Yeah.
That looks impressive.
It was, it had a certain quality about it that was like a living thing. It was more than just a flat, boring piece of equipment. It had, it had some life to it. And he designed that driver I showed you, the Cantus driver. So he was and so I spent a lot of time with him, picking his brain, learning from him the concepts that he used and so on, that I later applied, to my first cables that I built. And I think the reason that they worked and were successful was because I had this background of principles that I could apply from him. I just wanted to brief.
It all starts on certain ideas and builds upon this. It's like, in my world, I think that it's mostly like you never in vacuum. You always get inspired by somebody like yourself, right? So you get this inspiration, and there's an idea, then it's sort of, it's something I'd like to try out, right? And that's how it's like sort of the momentum is born, and one starts carrying and trying other things and venture out into things one never tried before eventually, right?
Yeah, and you're never really busy reinventing the wheel. You're learning, from what other people who've gone before have done. I mean, certainly you build on some classic circuits, right? But you do them in your own way. You see them, you interpret them, but you say, I can do this, or I can use this part here maybe a little differently. I can arrange this just a little differently and see what happens,
Exactly.
And then you build on that. So you bring that with you, and then some other stream comes in from somewhere else, and you go, I can do this thing, I can do that thing. And it snowballs. And of course, as we were talking earlier, and you said, gee, I wish I knew then what I know now,
Exactly. When you start off with, you more or less start with a blank page. right? Or with sort of couple of preconceptions. It's never 100% a blank page, but it is. You start somewhere, and you start out like as a child. You have mostly no preconceptions, right? You play with toys. You start discovering the world, right? The same as in audio. You start with, what does this do, right? What if I do this? What's going to happen, so to speak? That's what essentially it is. It's the hobby. It's trial and error, so to speak. You try, you see what works, what doesn't. Does it give you a motivation? Do you get new ideas or you don't? It depends on the individual and the circumstances, and they don't apply to everybody in the same way, right? So in your case, how did you sort of move into this expensive audio hobby? How did it happen?
Before we get there, though, I just wanted to pick up on something you just said, which was we want to remain like a child.
Yeah.
And that's really key. And I think it's really key for audio because when you're a child, everything is new. You know, you take in the world and you don't have an idea a priori of what something is. You know, there was a great Tibetan master named Chogyam Trungpa. And he said, you know, when you're born, everything is just swirling lights, colors, sounds, smells, and so on. But it doesn't have any, you know, fixed identity. It's just this swirl of everything. And then you begin naming things. You name this and you name that. And by the time you've named the last thing, that's the opposite of enlightenment. You've fixed everything. You have a preconception in your mind. So I think that what people are looking for in audio is a way to break through to that condition they had when they were a child, or when they first, like when I first heard Bach, and literal tingling up and down my spine. You know, it was a visceral experience. It wasn't just some head thing. And I think audiophiles are constantly looking, they want that experience. Of course, I mean, if you really genuinely want that experience, just go in the forest and become a hermit monk, you know, because that's all they do. You know, it's like, okay, I want everything to be new, so therefore I have to drop every preconception I have about everything. But,
well,
you know,
it is extremely difficult, as you know. It's extremely difficult because by the time we start playing with audio gear, there are already tons of preconceptions, and that is particularly true for the engineers. But they're already sort of educated textbooks. You know, that's where their knowledge originated, and so they are basically their world is sort of already conceptualized, right, by the textbooks and whatever they've been taught and lectured at school, at university, right? So, and then, it's very difficult sort of look outside. Everybody has a different sort of preconceptional world view and the process, the way the world view was formed, right? So my world view was formed from basically the basics of physics classes that I had at school, really, and from my academic background. Okay, my academic background is not engineering, but it's still academic background. So I had de facto sort of blank page approach with the academic background, if you know what I mean. So the way I approach audio is, it used to be my hobby, and I look at this, just like a child, just what we sort of mentioned. So I know this works. Now let's see what's going to happen if we do this. That sort of approach I had all the time. And obviously in the process, one learns a lot of techniques, how to work with oscilloscopes, how to work with certain software, how to work with CAD, how to sort of approach the design, think about the most important things, what matters, what we should focus on, so on and so forth. And I think, I want to say that I would never be able to do it all by myself. that needs to be said. I think I should have said it from the start, not because I learned something in school from somebody, but generally because one interacts with people like yourself, right? So we interact. And you're not an engineer either. You're a musician. But then I interact with engineers and with musicians, and with different people with different background. And different people with different backgrounds have a different views, and they have a different perspectives into how music should sound, what it should do, and so on and so forth. And so by interacting with different kinds of people, you learn something from them, right? So I learned from engineers how to design a circuit, what needs to be done in order to bring out certain aspect of music, what needs to be avoided. You learn it. And then the rest, as we already touched upon, you and I, is the aspect of trial and error. This is the hardest part, and this is the best way of learning something. The only way really to find out about the world is by trying, and failing, and trying,
absolutely,
and failing,
absolutely.
and trying. And eventually one succeeds. One discovers a certain formula which is applicable, I don't want to say universally applicable, but applicable within its own sort of limitation, and that seems to work.
So you mentioned earlier you wanted to talk about why hi-fi is so expensive.
Yeah, okay.
And
yeah,
I've been thinking about that, and like think about a great soprano. Think about all the training, practice, years and years of practice that went into creating this glorious instrument, and it's all right here. It's this tiny little area right here. Oh yeah, that's Rosie.
Nice. Rosie. Okay, Rosie. How is Rosie? Is Rosie. Is she she's female?
Yes.
Rosie. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Right. I have two myself. They're both gingers. Yeah. Okay. Rosie.
Yeah.
All right.
So, I mean, you have this very delicate membrane that produces the most magnificent sound that brings you to tears. And you have this whole body that surrounds this vocal cords and everything working together, the diaphragm, the bloodstream, the lungs, all of this is working together, the posture. And audio is to really get audio that touches you deeply. You have like in your field coil, and hopefully in my field coil speaker here, you have this delicate membrane that is surrounded by a powerful magnet, a powerful engine that's driving it, this big structure that holds it in place. And that's all in the service of this tiny little movement, this tiny little thing. And that tiny little thing is extremely sensitive. It will tell you everything. So you change one brand of resistor or capacitor in the same location, night and day, you can hear it, not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, different. And then you have to think about, so to create the structure that supports the membrane is a big deal. And to get it so that it's free.
And the point here that you're trying to make, if I assume, is that there are billion of different combinations and factors that can make up this cone of the driver. And the driver itself, you can virtually make the same look-alike drivers from million of infinite number of different materials and joined differently, and every aspect, every factor of how it's joined together, which material is being used, which glue being used, where it's being located, is going to affect the overall result, including the skills of the person who assembled that drive.
You know, this may seem far-fetched, but in Japan, you know, if you want to buy a very high quality tea bowl that's used in tea ceremony, the very highest quality, you don't walk into a store and buy it. They vet you and you have to be invited. So in that sense, you know, this idea of craftsmanship is also something that brings this human quality into this hobby, I feel. You know, you can mass produce all sorts of things, and they're all going to have this more or less sterile quality about them. But the beauty in handcrafted things is the variation, is the fact that they're not 100% uniform, and each one has its own character. Like a violins, you know, they're all different. All the Stradivarii, they're all different.
And then what most people don't understand is that one thing is one builds something for oneself. So if you decide to build a driver for yourself, is totally different. It's totally different ball game than if one decides to build something on mass production. So I'm saying like small batch production, say a batch of 10, 20, 50, 100 pieces. And that is then manufactured, right? That this is manufactured by people, right? And that is a different ball game altogether than building something for oneself, you know, two pieces or one piece. It is totally different. It involves a different process, different thinking. There are risks involved. There's a time. There's a cost. That, you know, there's an investment, and there's always a risk that something will not go according to plan, right? And this is all this if this needs to be all factored in, and so people look at our products, for example, and they ask themselves the question, oh, why is this so expensive, right? I mean, it looks so simple, right? So like virtually there's nothing in the chassis, right? A couple of transformers, a couple of circuit boards, a couple of tubes, a couple of passive components, and that's it. And the price tag, it seems too excessive to them, right? But, you know, they're always judging from their own sort of perspective. If they are coming from DIY, and which I come originally myself from too. So when I was building something for myself, that's totally different. It's a different ball game, as I mentioned it earlier. One has unlimited amount of time, or virtually unlimited. One is not limited. There's no time constraint. The budget is constrained, but one doesn't take into account the cost of time to do the R&D, and one starts sort of working on something. Then the cost of this R&D to get something even together, it just explodes exponentially. And by the time the person thinks, oh, well, I can build something for 1K, something similar. And if this person starts counting the number of hours to iron all these wrinkles out and to build and trial and error, that amounts then, like, it will come up together more and cost more than whatever we do, because there's no spillover of the knowledge and know-how, and they have to do everything from scratch. And if one takes this all into account, then the price is not just the price of the materials and components, but the most expensive part is the time. And even if you have a super elegantly simple circuit designs, that can take ages until one finds a proper match or harmonic match between these materials, these components, and the circuit design. And by that time one has this and sort of working prototype, and one sort of likes the outcome, I mean, there may be years apart.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, you know, when I think about an LPU3 balanced or a DAC3 balanced, I go, you know, how does he do it so cheaply? certainly in terms of sound quality compared to anything I've heard out there. Excuse me. It shows. I mean, the dedication you put into it it's more than the sum of all the things you just described. There's some real soul there. So I just wanted to say that. In terms of my process, I move slowly. I work with certain principles. I expand on them. In terms of cost, the materials themselves are expensive. The labor is expensive. We build cables from the inside out. They don't come to us on a reel that we snip at each end and terminate. And the reason we do that is we can do things that you can't do on a machine. In fact, when I first started out, I went to Western Massachusetts to meet this guy who specialized in building machines for cable building. And he looked at what I was doing and he said, well, maybe if you spend $1 million, I might be able to build you a machine that does this. But it has to be done by hand. At the time, we were using ribbons. We were using silver ribbons, and I felt they had a certain kind of advantage. But they needed to be treated. They needed to be wrapped in multiple layers of different materials, multiple shields. All these things had to be tied together. So it was kind of a back-breaking process. Imagine, having to wrap a dielectric around a cable like this, like you're wrapping handlebars on a bicycle. Yeah. I mean, it's exhausting, and it takes a toll on your body. The pinnacle of my ribbon phase, if you will. I mean, that was the better
ribbon
part of
costs
my
always
career.
more than round conductors. Ribbon
Yeah,
always
they have
more
to be
expensive because it needs to be drawn from the round conductors, right? And
it has to be fabricated custom. Everything.
Exactly.
Well, even today, all the silver wires that we use, they're all custom drawn and custom twisted and so on. But the kind of the magnum opus of the ribbon era was something I called the Sukhavati, which in Sanskrit means the realm of bliss. And it had basically a pound of silver per foot and weighed a ton. It was great sounding cable. I loved it. But I found ways to use round conductors more efficiently and get a better sound. So, but for the time, it was fabulous. The thing about silver, it's 7% more conductive than copper, right? So it does everything better than copper, including attracting noise to itself like an antenna. So you have to take extraordinary measures to mitigate all that accumulated noise and self-generated noise and sensitivity to vibrations, all of that. You really have to do a lot. And this feeds into the cost. You have expensive materials all the way across the board.
Yeah, and then the conductor material is one thing, but if one thinks in terms of what goes around the conductor, I mean, the dielectric, it's another 50%, well, I would say. So if the conductor, basically the whole cable is 100%, then the dielectric is at least like 30% of the sound, at least. Apart from the conductor, the geometry, the dielectric is a very strong factor. If you wrap, for example, that silver wire in dielectric of one type, it will sound one way. If you wrap it into a different dielectric, it will sound totally differently. If you space a little bit more between these conductors, or you create more a gap between the dielectric and the conductor, it will sound again differently. So until you figure out the exact the dielectric type, the tightness, the fit, the conductor itself, and the combination of the conductors and dielectrics, you already sort of exhausted at least a couple of hundreds of variations.
You need some kind of guiding principle. And one of the things that I pay close attention to is the triboelectric effect. Mm-hmm. When you put two materials next to each other, they're going to begin to exchange electrons. and the farther apart they are on the triboelectric scale, the more rapidly and vehemently they are exchanging these electrons. So I once built a power cable, a copper, like a 7-gauge power cable, and I was looking for a good-looking outer jacket just for cosmetics' sake, and I found this kind of spun glass material that had a nice sheen and it caught the light really nicely. And I put it over the cable and 50% of the performance was gone immediately. It was not subtle. So, and I prefer, if possible, to use natural materials, as much as possible. These are kind of guiding principles that I work with.
There is something to it in my experience as well. The more synthetic the material, like these PTFE, so this Teflon type of insulators, the more sort of synthetic the sound becomes, especially on the top end. It is a totally different sound as if you say you use a cotton or you use silk, or if you use, say, a silicone around it. The sound changes profoundly. Nobody cares what's inside as long as it looks cool and it looks good, right? It's polyester. It looks like it's hand woven or something, but it's made by machines. It's just a sleeve, right? What matters is what inside, right? But that's what matters, and how it's performing when you connect it in your system, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my objective is, I kind of feel like my job is around the periphery. I am trying to take noise out of the system. I don't want my cable to add anything or subtract anything. I accept noise. And also similarly with my grounding devices. So, you can put together a system with great components. But if your choice of cables or the manner in which you set it up is not optimal, you're not going to hear the full potential of that system. So what it is that I do, what I'm trying to do around the periphery of, magnificent electronics like what you produce, Slava, is to draw whatever noise, to address whatever vulnerabilities I can address so that more of what's there can shine through.
Maybe I can elaborate on this. So we're all about high performance audio. It's about music reproduction.
Yeah.
And it's reproduction of music in its highest possible potential. Therefore, the music needs to sound authentic, and it needs sound like music and not just like a collection of sounds, right? So that's what we're all about. And it's all about trial and error to find the right combination of materials, components, and circuit designs, which maximizes the potential. And there is, as I said, what makes everything so expensive is not necessarily the cost of the exotic materials, but the time, the R&D, the amount of trial and error that one has to go through in order to achieve its optimum, right? And in order to achieve an optimum, the same thing applies to any customer. A customer can obviously take a shortcut and just visit us or visit you, right?
Yeah.
And come and listen to your system, or come to Essex and listen to our system. But it's still going to take time for the customer to figure out what's happening, right? What system component does what.
I think, in a sense, the most valuable, asset, the most valuable asset in high-end audio is the listener that is really dedicated about sound. Their primary objective is music, love of music, and wanting to be able to penetrate the music and feel it. And this is what enables us to have products, that have a range of pricing, because not everyone can afford, the competition piece, the magnum opus piece. but they can have a part of that and they can enjoy that. And to me, that's really what matters. I mean, I see some of these listeners, for example, just recently, Stereo Sound, here I'm tooting my own horn, Stereo Sound magazine of Japan just came out with an article about my dealer in Hong Kong, Audio Exotics. And they're featuring this, well over $1 million system in Beijing with these Goebbels Divine Majestic loudspeakers that are 8 feet tall, have two 15-inch woofers, and the system is really, really tuned. And the gentleman, who owns it, very cultured, very deeply loving music. In his case, classical music. He loves classical music, and this is his way of penetrating into that. And when I see people like that, I feel gratified. I feel gratified he's got some of my products in his system, of course. But I feel gratified just to see people like that who have this level of enjoyment and this deep knowledge about the music. That, to me, is something that feels very special in this hobby.
I mentioned in my other previous videos, a system is an organism, right? And in order the system to perform at its best, at its optimal, everything needs to be matched and everything needs to be done under the same philosophy, ideally. And everything then works together and functions like a living organism. And then that sort of approach is not widely practiced, I would say.
It's very difficult to come across, and this dealer in Hong Kong, I feel, has really dedicated himself to putting systems together that every part works together. So the problem in this hobby is that too many people just read reviews and go off and buy a thing without considering how does this fit
without
into
understanding what are there.
And for that you really need a guide. So I feel like I've discovered a way. I don't say I've discovered the way. I have discovered a way. And if you like what you hear, you can follow, what I do. I'll give you my input as to what might be next, what might be the next step to take you to the next level. I've been fortunate in that most of the time I'm right, but we're following within a narrow band. We're not, seeking everything out there. We're just trying to focus on what can we do here and now that we know is going to work. And so I think that's the best approach. And customers who have dealers like that are very lucky. And customers who have dealers that are selling them boxes are very unlucky, and they can spend a lot of money and not have good sound.
Exactly. And they're not at the end getting what they think that they deserve to get. That's of course, that's what I feel like most people it's happening to them. They're just running in the circles and buying the next best, technology or review or whatever, without really understanding the underlying drive, what makes a great sound, right? Yeah. And this is not the hardest part, I think. The hardest part is actually to keep an open mind. That's what I think. It's be like what we started off with the conversation today, is being a child again. Try to figure out, try different things out and see what is actually the driving factor. So form the worldview, not based on somebody else's opinion, but based on your own experience.
As I said, I think that deep down, that's what everyone is yearning for from their hi-fi system, is to have that experience as though it's for the first time. And to the extent that we're able to maximize the system so it gives that connection, we've fulfilled that. Unfortunately, there's so much preconception. There is so much mental stuff around hi-fi. It's exhausting. And hopefully we've made all the mistakes so our customers don't have to live through that process. Hopefully we can speed them on their way to good sound in the shortest period of time possible. That's a worthwhile goal, to try and take care of them, and have that in the front of our minds.
Thank you for joining us today, Joe, and hope to speak to you some other time.
Well, I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
You, Cameron. Wonderful meeting you. And
yeah,
we'll talk again.
Yeah. Pleasure is all mine.